Hey, welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive, the podcast edition, the second installment, coming off the heels of UFC 130, Rampage versus Hamill, which took place this past Saturday. Good night overall. I think the card was what it was. We saw, we didn't have that superstar fight in the card, or at least the fight with gigantic implications, but there was a number of good fights. Some met expectations, some a little bit below expectations. I'll get into my overall record, just recapping the bonuses. Brian Stann, George Santiago, fight of the night. I could definitely see that. It was an interesting fight. Good performance by Brian Stann. George Santiago did not. I can't see him being happy this morning with how his UFC return played out. Submission of the night, Gleison Tibau. We actually saw that fight after the main event. They aired that. Tibau's a beast. Took that fight on short notice and still came out looking very good. And finally, knocker of the night, Travis Brown with a Superman punch, flooring Stefan Struve for picking up the extra bonus. He looked good in that fight. We'll talk about that and how that made me feel. Attendance-wise, not a huge turnout, 12,816, a significant drop-off off Rogers Center, but, that was never expected to meet anything close to that. Live gate just under $3 million. So, again, fun night, UFC 130. Some people probably won't be happy with the overall showing. I enjoyed the night, even though I lost a couple fights. I thought I had one. And I'm going to get into that shortly along with my record. So, Kamikaze Overdrive podcast, let's go. Starting off, we're going to quickly look at the untelevised preliminary fights. I predicted those fights, all three of them. What I decided to do this time, I had a lot of people messaging me asking for my prelim picks, as I had been sending them out and having a fair bit of success with them. I didn't mention it in the video, but I included the three preliminary fights that weren't going to be televised on the scroll bar at the bottom of my video, so I went back and forth on this, and I decided I'm going to include them in my overall record, and I will actually have a separate line for how my untelevised preliminary picks go. I went 3-0 on this night, so it continues a good run there, and I'm just going to touch on them briefly. Renan Barrero defeating Cole Escobedo. Hope I'm saying those names right. By unanimous decision, a couple 30-27s. Didn't get to see the fight. Was not able to watch it on YouTube, but got the win there. Michael McDonald, the young kid, defeating Chris Kamikaze Carasso. A 30-27, a couple 29-28s. So, again, McDonald keeps rolling. Wanted to take Carasso's nickname is Kamikaze. Had a little bit of allegiance there, but just couldn't take it based on who I thought was going to win. And finally, Gleison Tibau defeating Rafael Oliveira by submission in the second round here in the fight of the night, submission of the night. And Tibau took that fight on short notice. The guy's a beast, and the thing with him is because, like they mentioned on the show, as it aired after the main event, he's such a big dude, and he cuts so much weight, and his ability to do so in such a short period of time and come out and put on an excellent performance. I really want to see this guy continue to go up. He lost that tough fight against Jim Miller a couple, almost, a year ago, quite a long time ago. I think this guy can make some waves in the lightweight division. Do I see him contending? Nah, maybe not, but he certainly will have his say before he's all said and done. But 3-0 on there. I'm going to include those in my overall record. And so I went 3-0 on the preliminary picks that weren't televised. Moving now to the Spike preliminary fights. We had two of them. They both went the distance, so it kept us from seeing anything else. We kicked off the show. The show started great for me with Tim Boetsch defeating Kendall Grove by unanimous decision, all 30-27s. Boetsch was a beast. I really expected, if the weight cut went well, that his strength was going to show up in this fight, and it did. He did slow down, but he dragged Kendall Grove around, and I think he definitely, if he can continue to push, he, as a mid-carder in the middleweight division, he will have some success. For Kendall Grove, he's 14-9 now. He's really struggling. I think it's 2 losses in a row. I struggled to see him sticking around for maybe more than one fight in the UFC. If he loses the next one, he's definitely out. He could very well be cut after this. But he's at 6'6". He's a definable guy when you look at him, recognizable. I think that the UFC was smart, let him go, and then immediately signed him to fight in the Strikeforce middleweight division to add some depth and character there. I'm not saying that he's going to do any better, but he certainly will be a face that's noticeable and probably could have an impact to kick off a Strikeforce card, and certainly help out should there be injuries by being able to fill in. Moving on, Demetrius Johnson defeating Miguel Torres, my first defeat of the night by unanimous decision, all 3 29-28s. This concerned me, and this goes back to that debate of, and Joe mentioned it several times to the point of being sick of listening to him talk about it, but who's winning the fight? Is it the guy on top who's simply laying there, or is it the guy on the bottom who's at a disadvantageous position based on the judge's eyes, but is constantly attacking? And Torres was attacking. That first round was his. He had a lot of sweeps. He looked very good that way. He had some very close submissions, some near submission victories in that fight, and Johnson's just a workhorse, able to get out so quick and strong. The second round, again, a little less Johnson, I could see. The second and third round played out a lot alike, where Demetrius Johnson would take Torres down. Torres offered a couple sweeps again, submission attempts. But the thing I look at in this fight, and Johnson won all three judges' decisions, 29-28, is that at no point in that matchup was Demetrius Johnson on the verge of defeating Miguel Torres. Yet I think there were several opportunities for Miguel to finish that fight out and just couldn't quite do it. And that says in my opinion anyway, Torres should have had a decision, or at least if Johnson wins, it should have been a split. I struggle to believe that not even one of the three judges could have given 2 rounds to Miguel Torres in that fight based on his ability to offer submissions and catch Demetrius Johnson, sweep, full mount, because I don't think Johnson did enough with his takedowns and controlling Miguel, because Miguel was constantly attacking and Demetrius was on the defensive more than he was on the offensive. But first loss, we'll roll with it, and we're going to talk about the main card fights now. Alright, moving on to the main card fights. There were 5 of them, and my overall record on the main card was, looking at it, was 3-2, which is not bad, not great. I really like it when I'm able to limit my losses to 1 or none on the main card, because those, they're on the main card. They're the most important fights of the night, but 3-2, we'll go with it. Opening fight of the night, Brian Stann versus George Santiago. That fight could not have played out any better in my mind, the way I predicted it. Brian Stann looked excellent. Santiago, he didn't look bad, but the big issue was his chin. Stann exposed it, cracking him a couple of times, had him backpedaling, eventually finishing him late in the second round. Santiago threw some interesting stuff at Stann, and there were a couple times where Santiago got his shots in, and you could see it stopped Stann, or at least slowed him down for the time being, but he eventually came back. Brian Stann's a tough dude, but the question is, how high can he go in the middleweight division? Could we see him fighting Anderson Silva in the near future if he gets another win or two, or at least contending for the title? He's definitely a guy, I think, when Anderson Silva eventually moves on and retires, if it happens in the next couple of years, will be in the mix based on his skill set and how tough a guy he is to get out of there. And now that he's out of the 205-pound division, he's not going to run into these super extreme tough wrestlers that will be able to control him. George Santiago back to the drawing board. Not 100% sure where to go with this. Maybe he can match up with Yoshihiro Akiyama. That might be interesting. But, we'll see. I'm sure he'll come back stronger and better than ever. We might see him on a live card or a free card next. He's a name, and we'll look forward to seeing him again, I'm sure. Brian Stann, interesting where to go with him. Alan Belcher's got a fight coming up. I think if Belcher gets a win over Jason McDonald, a Stann-Belcher fight might be very interesting. Belcher's a tough dude, and it would be a nice test for Brian Stann. Maybe, this guy, Michael Bisping, against Stann would be a very interesting fight as well at middleweight. Bisping's expected to be on the Ultimate Fighter, so that fight probably won't happen for quite a long time. But nonetheless, Brian Stann continues to climb the rankings. Rick Story versus Thiago Alves. Dana White in a post-fight interview said he was very happy with Rick Story. Story clearly won the first 2 rounds and lost the third round. That was one of those fights, like they mentioned, if it goes 5, I think Thiago Alves wins, because he was starting to open up. The performance in the third round, as I had Alves to win, I should say that first. The performance in the third round from Thiago Alves was what I was hoping for earlier in the fight, and I expected that Story might be able to come out, because I picked Alves by decision. Story might be able to come out, dominate the first round. Alves will really make him work, and then as Story faded a little bit, Alves would start to pick him apart. Unfortunately, that didn't come to pass until the third round. But Thiago Alves was definitely in that fight, and it's that wrestling situation. Strong wrestlers that can control him. Where's he going from here? This knocks him down the rankings. I'd still say, at least in my rankings overall, he's in the top 10 of the contenders in the UFC easily, probably top 6 or 5 or 6. I had him top number 4, I think, before number 4 or 5. Rick Story was not in the top 10. He is now in the top 10. He's called out John Fitch. I really want to see that fight happen, because we're going to find out how tough John Fitch is, because he's only lost to George St. Pierre in the draw to GSP in recent memory. And now he's going to fight a guy who's got very strong wrestling in Rick Story, who's got very powerful hands. Really would look forward to seeing that fight. Hopefully John Fitch can get back from his injury and get things rolling. Thiago Alves, on the other hand, maybe, I know people don't like to match a loser up with a winner, but Thiago Alves versus Diego Sanchez would be interesting. I know Dan Hardy's fighting Chris Lytle, but I think a Hardy-Alves fight would be very, a good fight. We'd see a stand-up war, absolutely, and we'll see where these guys can go from there. Moving on to Travis Brown versus Stefan Struve. I had Struve to win this by stoppage, expecting Brown to fade in the later stages. We never got there. He definitely looked like he was slowing down a little bit, but he took care of that issue by knocking out Stefan Struve at the 4:11 mark of the first round. Vicious Superman punch. Struve left openings. And I guess if you're going to beat Stefan Struve, that's the way to do it. Nelson did it, or Roy Nelson did it, and now Travis Brown did it here. If you're going to beat Stefan Struve, do not allow him to rally back from a beating. Just stop him with one punch. And Travis Brown did that. It was well done. Stefan Struve, the skyscraper, came tumbling down. That was a brutal knockout and really awkward looking fall. You see the way his head twists back and his body contorted before he dropped to the mat. I'm sure Struve will be back. The guy's young. He's got a lot of skill sets. He definitely looks like he's growing into his body, which is nice to see. He's not as gangly looking. But at 6'11", the sky's the limit for this guy. Now Travis Brown on the other side of things. He had made the statement that he felt he could make a run within the next couple of years of the title, and I kind of laughed it off. I wasn't overly impressed with Brown against Congo, and I have to come out. I made a comment on the show about Brown's striking not being that great. He definitely showed it here. He's got power. The question is, where does Travis Brown go from here? Is he in the top 10? Contender-wise, in my opinion, he might be number 10 in the division. Potential matchups for Brown. I actually would like to see Brown face the winner of Czech Congo Pat Barry. If Congo wins that fight, you get the rematch from their draw and it's some unfinished business. I think Brown would probably like to get that, that blemish off his record. If Pat Barry wins, you've got two young up-and-coming fighters going at it. Again, that would be 6'7". Travis Brown against a much shorter Pat Barry, so interesting there. That's who I like to see. On the other side of things, Stefan Struve, he could take on the loser of that fight. Again, very interesting, and determine where these guys sit in the division. But Brown, that's a huge win for him. Plus, he gets the $70,000 knockout of the night bonus. Big time cash for the young kid. He's 11-0-1. So congratulations to Travis Brown. And I'm sure we'll see him. I would expect, being young and fairly undamaged coming out of that fight, we will see him very shortly. Now moving to the co-main event, Frank Mir defeating Roy Nelson. This one played out almost exactly as I expected it to. I had Frank Mir to win by decision. I just felt Frank, if Roy was going to beat him, he'd have to do it early. Frank was able to avoid the early barrages, and there were a couple tense moments where Roy connected with big shots that, you wonder, okay, is Frank okay? And he never stumbled, he never really stepped back, and Frank executed an excellent game plan, mixing up the takedowns with his striking. I actually expected a little more striking from Frank Mir, but everyone's wrong, as you saw with Joe Rogan at the beginning of the fight, saying that Roy Nelson's grappling would be superior to Frank Mir's. That was not even close to the case. Frank Mir took him down, controlled him on the mat, but at the same time, Frank was unable to finish him, and a lot can be attributed, and they talked about it again, is that big belly of Roy Nelson's prevents guys from getting the hooks in and controlling on the mat, makes him very, very tough. It's almost like trying to, control a barrel. And that's what Frank Mir wasn't able to do, but he did get the W. He looked much better in this fight than the Mirko Krokop fight. I don't know where to go from here. If I'm Frank Mir, maybe take on the winner of Big Nog, Brendan Schaub. He was originally scheduled to face Big Nog at, I believe it was UFC 119. So if Nog wins, we've got that rematch again, and Mir continues to push his way up and avoid those big, powerful guys like Shane Carwin, Brock Lesnar, until maybe he's ready for it, make one last run at it. If Schaub wins, it's Mir versus an up-and-coming lion, and Brendan Schaub, it's going to be a striking matchup again. It's a good matchup for Frank Mir, so we'll see if that plays out. For Roy Nelson, he could take on the loser of that fight. Again, it would set up another rematch with Brendan Schaub coming off the Ultimate Fighter finale finals that Nelson won. Schaub much improved. We'll see how that plays out. Against Big Nog, again, it would be a veteran for Nelson, but he's lost 2 in a row, Dos Santos and Mir, and he's taking on top competition, but you really have to wonder, where's his position in the division? He's slipping down because he can't seem to beat those upper echelon fighters. And one thing I'm getting really tired of, and it's obvious, you look at Roy Nelson, he's a big dude, he's got the big gut, he's not in the shape, he fights hard, he's not in the shape. I was nervous he was going to die at the end of the fight, the way he was sitting on the stool heaving. But you hear Joe Rogan talk about it over and over again. We're not stupid, Joe. We can see it. Leave the guy alone, for goodness sake. But at the same time, I'd like to see Roy, drop a few pounds, get in a little bit better shape, and go from there. I think the guy's got an incredible amount of potential, and wish him nothing but the best from here on out. Moving to the main event, which was originally scheduled to be the co-main event, the Edgar Maynard fight. But the main event, I took Rampage by stoppage. He dominated Matt Hamill from start to finish. Matt Hamill, if anything, Matt Hamill had said before the fight that he would break Quinton's will. Clearly that was not the case in this fight, as Rampage ran over Matt Hamill, slamming away. Hamill didn't have a lot to offer. His shots looked sloppy and telegraphed, and he simply was unable to do anything effectively, losing the fight. All three judges scored at 30-27. Rampage came in, said he had a fractured hand. He said he came into it with a fractured hand, but at the end of the fight, you saw him pointing to his hand and giving the broke motion. So you have to wonder, did he break it more? Did he actually, how did that play out? Who was he telling that to? Was he telling it to someone else, saying, hey, my hand was broken? Or was he telling it to his corner, saying, hey, I broke my hand? Either way, he got the win, and now they're talking that if he can heal up, he would face John Jones next for the light heavyweight title. It'd be an interesting matchup. I don't know how much. Jackson's had trouble with strong wrestlers in the past, and everyone's going to point at Dan Henderson in the matchup and say Henderson was able to take him down, but Hamill wasn't here. So, and Rampage has decent takedown defense. John Jones is in another league, folks. This guy is so big and so strong. He's able to use his leverage. He's 6'4". He'll have a couple inches of height and reach over Rampage, and I could really see Rampage spending the majority of that fight on his back and getting pounded out and really struggling. And that's a fight that if Rampage isn't prepared and dedicated for, which I can't see how he wouldn't be, seeing it's a title fight, it could be very bad for Rampage and pretty much the end of Quinton Rampage Jackson in the UFC. For Matt Hamill, and again, this is comments coming out of Dana White's mouth at an interview afterwards, he was not impressed with Matt Hamill. And the interviewer actually asked him, does it not raise his stock that he hung with Rampage? And Dana said, I'm going to come out and say, give you my honest answer. No, it doesn't. He looked sloppy. He didn't have a good performance, and this knocks him down a couple pegs in the division. And, who could Matt Hamill face next? Vladimir Matyushenko is coming off a big victory over Jason Brills at UFC 129. Again, it's a winner versus a loser. But I think this would be an opportunity for Matyushenko to really show off what he has, and Hamill at the same time take on a cagey veteran and put himself back on the map with a victory. The Phil Davis-Matt Hamill fight was supposed to take place at UFC 129. If Phil were to drop his matchup with Rashad Evans, maybe Phil Davis-Matt Hamill could be hooked up. Very interesting there. Maybe Jason Brills. He's certainly a wrestler out there floating around. Would be a good matchup for Matt Hamill. Give Matt a chance to showcase his hands again. And another fight that I just came up with on the fly, which might be interesting, is at the Ultimate Fighter, Kyle Kingsbury is taking on Fabio Maldonado in the 205 division. I think a Kyle Kingsbury matchup with Matt Hamill, maybe in an ultimate or another free fight, would be interesting. Kyle Kingsbury, relative unknown, so it's a struggle for Matt Hamill in that sense. But hey, we all got to fight somebody, we all got to get paid, and if Hamill's going to reestablish himself, he has to start somewhere, because he definitely dropped a lot, in my opinion, coming out of that fight. And I'd said it in my predictions that his hands would look good against guys whose hands are in the same league as him. Now he's taking on a guy who's got better striking, and he's a more seasoned striker in Jackson, and he got exposed, unfortunately. And Hamill will be back, there's no doubt in my mind there, but not on this night. So those were my main card predictions. I ended up going 3-2 on the main card. On the Spike prelims, I went 1-1, and on the untelevised prelims, I went 3-0, resulting in an overall record of 7-3, which I'll add to my prediction record. My overall total record now sits at, let me find it here, I am 89-41, which is just short of 69%. Not a bad record. Again, I'd like to get to 75, and going 7-3 definitely saved those undercard prelims saved me. And I'm going to keep honest with you. Everything I post on the board, the scroll bar at the bottom, I'm going to include my record if I go 0-3, 3-0, whatever. And I did do it for my Ultimate Fighter picks, finale picks. My UFC record now 80-32. My main event prediction record now 15-9. So I think that's pretty solid. Moving up. The main events are usually the best, should be the most evenly matched fight, because you have two big names going at it, but not always the case. But so those are my main card picks, preliminary picks, how I did, and I'm going to wrap this up in a few minutes. So just quickly finalizing my second installment of my Kamikaze Overdrive podcast, coming off the heels of UFC 130. I went 7-3 overall. My next prediction show is for the Ultimate Fighter 13 finale. It's already up and running, so please check that out. I provide predictions for, of course, the main event, which I'm really looking forward to, in Clay Guida and Anthony Showtime Pettis. I also did the Kyle Kingsbury, Fabio Maldonado fight, and the Tim Crater versus Ed Herman fight. Now, because we don't know quite at this moment, or when I did the video anyway, who is in the finals, I provided predictions for the 2 semifinal matchups between Chris Cope and Ramsey Najim, and Tony Ferguson and Chuck O'Neill. So I predicted both of them, and I will count those 4 against my record, and then I predicted the final matchup based on who I picked, and then I also quickly provided who I thought, if one or both of my predictions was wrong in the semis, how the outcome would play out in the finals with the other fighters. So we'll see how that goes. That's going down next weekend. We'll know who's in the finals this week or on Wednesday. I think the Ultimate Fighter has definitely picked up since the start of the show. It's improved, and I'm enjoying it more, and we'll see how that plays out. Please check out lowkick.com. I do a podcast there with Ryan Ventura, who's a member of Low Kick. Great show. It's called Split Decision. And we usually do a pre-fight show for each event. I'm not sure when our next one's going to be, but please check that out. And feel free to comment on this, on my rankings. And take a look, too, at my UFC, or my Ultimate Fighter video. I've added a new little feature in one of the boxes at the side. I'm adding who I'm doing well with fighter-wise and who I'm not doing well with. And of course, Jim Miller, my sworn enemy now at 0-3, or with a couple other guys like Nate Marquardt, John Jones, and Jake Ellenberger, I'm riding a pretty good record at 3-0. So just take a look, check that out, and as always, like I said, comment, let me know what you think, tell me what you want me to talk about next time if you want me to talk about anything. And UFC 130, fun night, but not the best record, 7-3. It'll get better, 70%. Hopefully, we'll improve upon that. And quickly, before I go, I'd like to give a shout out to the Boston Bruins, Eastern Conference champions. Will be taking on the Vancouver Canucks for the Stanley Cup. Vancouver, of course, the favorite team of my co-host on Split Decision, Ryan Ventura. I'd like to wish Vancouver and Ventura the best of luck, but not too much luck, as I want to see my Boston Bruins take home the Stanley Cup for the first time since 1972. And as always, thank you for listening. I'm out of here.